Yo, what's going on, guys? It is Bunik here, back again with a brand new video today. This is going to be an interesting kind of video because I'm going to do a spoiler review for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And what's interesting about this review is that I don't really think I've ever done like a spoiler review in this kind of fashion before. I have done a couple Marvel reviews where I've done like a spoiler-free section and then I'll do a whole spoiler section in like the other half of the video. My only real exception is Spider-Man No Way Home, which I talked about spoilers pretty much the whole way through because I felt like that was appropriate for that movie. I did a spoiler-free review for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. If you haven't checked that out, make sure you go check that out. But it was brought to my attention that I probably should do a spoiler review as there is a lot of really exciting stuff in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And so I decided, why the hell not, and let's just do a spoiler review for it. Now, if the actual like script I have for this video, it's not really a script, I kind of just have like a lot of notes. I know it seems like a lot, and I'm going to try not to spend too much time with it. But I kind of just have like sections of the film and like bullet points and like things I kind of want to talk about of like things I like. I don't want to necessarily make like a summary of the story. I kind of just want to talk through things I liked within the various parts across the movie. And I'll try to make sure this video doesn't get too long or that doesn't go overly in-depth because I feel like it would just like be way too much at that point. I'll try to make sure this video is somewhat concise and that it's not just like some super long rambling video. And yeah, so without further ado, let's get into the review for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. And because of the spoiler review, I've warned you. From this point on, we are talking about spoilers. Alright, so the first part I want to talk about is the beginning of the story, and basically the bullet points I've written down is the way the heroes are at the beginning of the movie is interesting because they're kind of like the way that we saw them in Avengers Endgame, as well as some of the stuff we see from Avengers Infinity War, as well as some of the stuff that we saw from the Guardians of the Galaxy Holiday Special. And we see that like they're still dealing with a lot of the things they've gone through within these past few projects. And the first thing I've written down is Star-Lord having a drinking problem. I find kind of interesting. They don't really go all that depth into it, but it feels kind of fitting for the character considering everything that's happened to him prior to this film. Everything with like his dad, with Yondu, with what happened with Gamora, with Thanos. Also Mantis being his half-sister announced in the Holiday Special. You know, that's like all stuff that I feel like is a lot of big change for Peter, and so it's kind of interesting to have this like new arc in this thing where it's like he actually has like something that's giving him a problem because of the trauma or the stuff that he's gone through throughout these last few years. And so even though it's not explored all that much, it added some like a little bit of depth to Peter though, because it actually made me kind of see Peter as like more human than he ever felt. And he's a pretty human character, so that's saying something. And right after we find out about Peter's drinking problem, we see where the Guardians are at. Right out the gate, Adam Warlock is attacking the city, and I didn't really know all that much about Adam Warlock going into the movie. I just knew he was a popular comic book character. So when I saw him wrecking through stuff, I wasn't entirely sure what this all was about or what it meant, but it was a very interesting sequence nonetheless, and it ultimately ends in Rocket getting injured, which kicks off this whole adventure, as well as Warlock getting stabbed through the chest from Nebula, which I thought was a really good scene from Nebula. Because I felt like Nebula never really had all that many scenes to shine, aside from some of the stuff that happened with her in Endgame, definitely. And so it was cool to see her get this other scene. And this whole story with Rocket, oh man, what a story. Let's talk about that story. So with Rocket's background story, it's told like at multiple different points throughout the film, and I'm kind of just going to like go through it pretty quickly instead of just like talking about it from this point and from this point and from this point, because I feel that's a bit redundant. But Rocket's backstory with the other animals and the High Evolutionary. So we find out about the High Evolutionary being involved with Rocket's story, and we find out that he's like the main villain for the movie. And man, what a heartbreaking story. Like honest to God, like this is what I find really great about Guardians of the Galaxy, that Rocket is not a human. He's an animal, but yet they still give him human emotions. And that's something that like is truly remarkable about what they write with these characters. You really do have to like feel for these characters. You're going to have them in there. And like they made me care for Rocket as if he were a human. And I think that if you're an animal lover, this movie is going to be really hard for some of you. It's definitely got some... It's rough. Yeah, we find out the High Evolutionary is doing experiments on Rocket because he wants to preserve his own intelligence. I'm talking about the High Evolutionary's intelligence, not Rocket's. And so it's that whole thing. It's a very selfish, you know, motive. At the same time, it seems like he kind of reminds me of some other villain archetypes I've seen with kind of like with Bill the Butcher in Gangs of New York or Agent Smith in The Matrix. It might seem like weird comparisons, but they have this whole thing of creating a perfect society or a perfect singularity or a perfect species. Also kind of like some of the deleted scenes with the Lizard and The Amazing Spider-Man. This whole thing of like everything needs to be perfect, and so when something isn't in that perfection box, it like angers them. And so that's what we learn about the High Evolutionary. Makes him a very intimidating villain. All the stuff that we see with Rocket and the other animals in the cage, I loved seeing that, because even though it is a dark story, I actually really like seeing Rocket have friends in this dark period of his life. And I gotta say though, like we're going major into the end of the story now. Lila's death was just heartbreaking. I really was just like, no, I felt so bad for Rocket in that scene. I genuinely like almost cried. I was just like, man, this is like. I think the last time I felt that bad for one of the Guardians was whenever Gamora got taken away from Peter, and also whenever Peter found out that Thanos killed Gamora. Like so. Oh man, that whole scene with Lila dying was just heartbreaking. And then also Teeves and Floor dying, them and that causing Rocket's abandonment from the High Evolutionary. We see this whole thing make Rocket who he is, and that's always what's been interesting is that Rocket's backstory has always been a mystery. We've always heard things about like, oh, all the stuff I've gone through, and now that we've seen it, it really it hits hard, especially considering. Like, the times he was sad in Endgame and the times he was sad in Infinity War, like, it hits harder now knowing this story. And also, the whole thing about Lila's death causing Rocket to scratch the High Evolutionary's face off. That was an amazing and intense and disturbing and rough scene, because it really does show a lot of Rocket's character. It shows where he got that rage from, but also just, like, oh man, that's a rough way to handle it. So, Rocket's story was very well told, but oh man, was it heartbreaking. Now, I've already gone through the story, but like this whole thing about them having to save Rocket is what kicks off this whole adventure. So they have to get the code for the kill switch so that he doesn't die, because there's a kill switch on the back of him. And so that's a very interesting thing that the High Evolutionary did to Rocket as a species. The fact that they actually have a kill switch and that there's a code to disable it is really interesting. And them going on this mission caused them to meet this alternate version of Gamora, who's now one of the Ravagers for Orgacorp. And this is what I was really skeptical, but also interested to see what they were going to do with Gamora going into this movie, because it's not the same Gamora that we knew from the previous movies. This is Gamora from 2014, after the time travel stuff in Endgame. And she's a very different Gamora, but I actually like what they did with her. It felt fitting for the story, and it was kind of interesting to see Gamora be this, like, ruthless person that, like, she was in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and you basically see this is what Gamora would have been like had she never changed. All the stuff at Orgacorp I thought was very fun and exciting stuff. I know the subject matter is serious, but they do have some fun with this movie. Some of my favorite stuff is I loved seeing Mantis and Drax mess with people's brain. I thought it was fun to see Mantis be like, you have undeniable attraction to him. Why is it always me? That was some of the best stuff ever. I kind of had like weird issues with Mantis and Drax in Guardians Volume 2. I loved them a lot more in the holiday special. I liked it in this one. They're like real friends. I really thought that stuff was fun. It was also interesting during all this stuff to see Quill catch Gamora up on events. And I liked how Nebula was like, you left some stuff out, but yeah, that is the gist of it. And Nebula being involved with this story, I thought was like, it really added something to it, because it really showed that like, Nebula was there, but she really did care about Peter, and she really did care about Gamora, and so I thought it was really fitting that she basically tried to back Peter up as well as back Gamora up, because these are two people she loves, and she doesn't want to see them, like, have this beef going on, so I thought the fact that she was involved with it was really nice. It was also kind of interesting seeing some familiar James Gunn-associated faces like Nathan Fillion and Daniela Melchior and Jennifer Holland, some people that we've seen within the DC stuff that James Gunn has done. It was just kind of interesting to see some of his friends in there based off his previous projects. Their departure for Counter-Earth because the code was removed from the file, so it was a very fun scene. I also liked the scene with them within the suits and them getting the suits in space by accident because of the trash chute. That was funny. But it was kind of interesting to see them like have this whole scene of like them going to get the code, which might seem like a waste of time for some people, but I like the fact that like they used this time to really like flesh out the characters. I thought that was really smart of them. And then being followed by Adam Warlock was really interesting, because in this sequence we find out that he's a weapon for the Sovereign, and how him basically being a tool for these people, it actually adds some sympathy to this character. This guy who we saw going and murdering people in nowhere actually has some sympathy now, because we find out that he's a tool, and he's now tracking Rocket for his brain for the High Evolutionaries. The High Evolutionary can do more experiments on it, so it's like you feel some sympathy for him because he's basically a tool for these people, but you also am just like, those are some pretty vile things he's doing, but at the same time we know that he's just doing his job. He's not just doing this to get his rocks off, so interesting stuff for Adam Warlock there. And once we get to Counter-Earth, I really think that the Counter-Earth stuff is interesting. There's some other also really funny stuff that I'm glad they put that in there, like Drax throwing the ball at the kid and hitting him in the face. I know some people were like horrified by it. I actually found it kind of funny, because we know that Drax is a nice guy, and you can tell that he wanted to play with the kid. When the kid didn't get that and got hit in the face, Drax laughed because he can't help himself. I also thought it was funny how Drax kept putting his feet up on the couch. It's like, Drax, stop taking your feet off the couch. This is getting ridiculous. I loved that. It was also really funny to see Peter drop an F-bomb. Just get in the car. No, open the door. It's like the first time they ever did that in MCU movie. I thought they put that in there perfectly. I felt like if any of them were going to say the F-bomb, it was going to be Peter. It's like I feel like he's been waiting for that forever. And that was really funny to see. We said some funny moments. And then whenever we see them divide, we see Peter, Groot, and Nebula go to the High Evolutionary ship, and we see Drax, Mantis, and Gamora stay with Rocket. And so this kind of departure is interesting because it kicks off this whole sequence of the Guardian, or like some of them trying to catch up with the other ones, and then them being in like two different places at once, which I feel like caused a lot of like tension, but you also get a whole lot of really cool action out of it. I thought the scene with Groot and Star-Lord within the High Evolutionary's office where they like got their arms out like that and they're doing stuff, that was awesome. That was really cool to see. You know, so we do get some cool stuff out of these like sequences of them being in two places at once, but then all of them meeting back up together to on the High Evolutionary ship because he destroys the planet with Aisha on it, which actually, that's Adam Warlock's creator, so that was interesting to see Adam Warlock's creator die, and it's like, it adds more like nuance to his character, so more like, it's like he can be tragic even though what he's doing is bad. And so this whole sequence, it's like there's a lot of stuff happening, but I actually do feel like it's ran together pretty well, and you get a lot of really emotional moments out of it, and I appreciate that. Then when we go from there to entering orbit with the High Evolutionary, this is where like emotions just go galore, because this is like truly where we find out that Rocket's story was getting tragic with all the flashback stuff. I find interesting how like the retrieval of the code from Peter and Groot, so they go and they take it to Gamora and they go inside the ship and the rescue happens, and basically they have to use the code to bring Rocket back to life. And I remember I was so worried that Rocket was going to die. I was like, I already had tears coming out of my eyes. I thought Rocket was going to die during the scene. And that whole last moment where he had Harry Potter Dumbledore moment where he saw his friends for like the last time before he nearly flatlines, where he actually got to see them. It's like, but it's not your destiny to die yet, and he comes back to life. It's like mixed emotions galore. Really like well-directed, well-written stuff, and I can't believe like how human these characters feel in this scene, man. It's really, really well done stuff. Like, they actually like made me feel bad for these animals because of like how human they made them feel. And I thought it was really sweet that Rocket got like one last moment with them, and then he came back to life. I'm glad that Rocket didn't die, because I was so worried about that happening. And then this is the part where we see Nebula, Drax, and Mantis aboard the High Evolutionary ship. And it's because they tried to meet back up with Peter and all of them, and then they got lost, and so they got to go save them now. This is where it really starts to get exciting for me, because I have written down my next chapter, Nebula, Drax, and Mantis, and the Final Showdown. So I really thought it was sweet when they met the humanoid children with Nebula, Drax, and Mantis. And this is what I was talking about in my spoiler-free review, which I like the fact that these three characters spent a lot of time together, because you got to see them fight, you got to see them have fun, and like you really got to see like all three of them like be friends in their own kind of weird way. And what I really liked about this scene with the humanoid kids was how Mantis and Nebula were making them cry, and Drax like, stop doing that. And Drax is like, he's being a little bit rude. He's kind of like making fun of them, but he actually makes them laugh. And I thought that was really awesome, considering that a couple of moments before this, Mantis and Nebula were mocking his intelligence. They were saying, oh, he was stupid. And so it was cool to see Drax have that moment, because it shows that Drax may not necessarily be the most intellectual person, and we've seen that, but emotionally, Drax is very good with emotions. He did have a little bit of a rough patch. He had to learn through insulting people and making stupid decisions and saying dumb things to become that way. But man, like what an arc Drax actually has. He's like out for revenge. He's all intimidating in the first one, and then we see Drax just become this much more decent and honorable person throughout these movies. And like, you gotta love it, man. Like, he's a weird, funny character, but you gotta love Drax. You can't not love what they do with his arc, man. I really loved what they did with that. And then it's really fun about this scene is that we see like the three of them get captured, which is, you know, is dangerous for them. But this is where Kraglin, played by Sean Gunn, and everybody from nowhere start to come for the final showdown, kicking off, which is probably, in my opinion, the most epic Marvel showdown that we've seen since any of the Avengers movies. I think like this is up there with Endgame, Infinity War, the first Avengers, as well as the airport scene in Civil War. I thought that the final battle here was freaking amazing. And I thought it was cool how they got to have Kraglin and all the other people from nowhere come to join, made it more epic, made it more emotional. And so this is where the final showdown kicks off. And this is where probably my favorite scene in the movie happens, is the rescuing of the three characters that got captured, kicking off the corridor scene, which is a top-tier MCU action scene. I love it because, like, yes, it's just a hallway, but the way the camera pans and the way the choreography is, my God, it was incredible to look at. James Gunn directed the hell out of that scene. The choreographers, you got to give them like all the credit you really can, because it looked incredible. It's like, I want to like go back and see that scene so many times. whenever it eventually comes out on Disney Plus. I think it's a really amazing, well shot, phenomenally just well done corridor scene. I don't know how many other words I can use to describe it. I just adored that scene. Yeah, and I also love the fact that the Guardians saved the children in the end. It was like, I'm glad that they cared for the people on the ship, because they could have just destroyed the ship because, like, the High Evolutionary's going to die. But they decided to save the people who was worth it, so I love that they saved the children, giving them a new home on Nowhere. I also really love that Drax rescued Adam Warlock, because everyone deserves a second chance, which really pays off in the next part, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Yeah, so right before we go into that, Rocket's arc. I really love the way that Rocket's arc goes in this whole Final Showdown sequence. So, Rocket freeing the little baby raccoons was wonderful because he doesn't want those little raccoons to go through what he went through. I loved seeing Rocket be so heroic in that scene. I also love how whenever he realized that it said a raccoon on the label, he decided to finally stop denying his species. It was like, you know what? I am a raccoon and I'm proud of that. He's a proud raccoon now. And I love that whenever the High Evolution comes in, it's like, and he tells him whatever, it's like, the name's Rocket. Rocket Raccoon. And shoots him, and it's just like, yes! It's like he's proud of who he is. Like, Rocket's not afraid of who he is anymore. Like, he's not apologizing for it, and he's getting revenge on the guy who ruined him. And it's just like, so it's like justice and vindication at its highest, man. It's just really incredible what they do with that. And him pulling the face off the High Evolutionary, that last scene, and decides to just let him die in the explosion as opposed to just killing him brutally like that, felt like a fitting conclusion to Rocket's arc, because he doesn't want him to suffer because of all the stuff that he suffered through, but he also knows it's not safe to keep this guy alive, so let's just let him die in the blast radius, which I thought was really fitting for Rocket's character. It's really fitting for it's really a fitting ending to the High Evolutionary as well. I really love the way they go about that. And like it's just such a crazy twist what they do with the High Evolutionary, man. Like there's so many moments where I was just like, that's crazy. Like my jaw dropped. Now we're moving on to the final moments of the film, but this is just some of my favorite stuff. What I really love was the scene where Peter Quill was jumping off the thing and he had to go back and get his Zune because he couldn't leave his music behind. And he jumps in, we think he's going to die, and he's freezing. I was getting ready to cry. I thought he was going to die. And at the last moment, Adam Warlock touches him, and he saves him. It's just like, dude, talk about redemption at its best. I think the last time I was this excited about redemption was what happened with Peter 3 in Spider-Man No Way Home. I saw this, and I was just like, this is incredible. We only see this guy for this movie. We've never seen Warlock in a movie before. So the fact that they made me hate him and feel bad for him and love him and be happy for him all in one movie, even with the limited amount of screen time that Will Poulter had, is truly incredible. And the thing that I love so much with this scene is I love the fact that Peter didn't die. I was so happy about that. And what I really loved about this scene was whenever they all decided to do the group hug with Peter, I like the fact that at the last moment, Adam and Warlock decided to join in on the group hug. And I love this scene because we learned that he didn't really have a family experience throughout his life. He was a tool for these people. And so he now has a new family in these people, and that they gave him a second chance, and they're giving him a home now on Nowhere. And it was such a great thing to see, because that's always what's been interesting about the Guardians of the Galaxy, was that these were all people who didn't have a family. They had a really bad life with their family and didn't really have anyone, so they had to come together and make their own family. And Adam Warlock basically sees that about these people. It's so awesome to see. I loved it so much. I also love during this whole sequence that they do with Cosmo. So we see at the beginning there's some jokes about Kraglin saying Cosmo's a bad dog. But I love how whenever Cosmo has the idea to use a telekinesis and to use the ships to latch together to save the people, he was a hero in that scene. I love how Kraglin gave him credit. He was like, you're a good dog, Cosmo. And it's just like, yes. Even the side characters like Kraglin and Cosmo, even they had incredible arcs. That's what I love about this movie. Every single character had their shining moment, and they all had their arcs, and they all had their things fleshed out so well. Even the minor characters you don't see all that much, even they had satisfying endings. And that's truly the best thing about this movie, in my opinion. Yeah, so we go back to Nowhere, and we see that the Guardians decided that they're going to go in their own separate ways for now. And I love how whenever they do the this stuff, and they decide that they're still going to be family, they're just going their own separate ways. I love what happens with Groot, where we see the team together as a family, and Groot saying, I love you guys. We finally got to see Groot say something other than I am Groot. We didn't even know that was possible. And the fact that of all the things he could have said, he said this, is just perfection. It's yes, he could not have said something better. It was perfect. It brought a tear to my eye. I loved it. I'm so glad they put that in there. I'm so happy they put that in there. I also thought it was really sweet how Peter made Rocket the new leader of the Guardians of the Galaxy. And after everything Rocket went through in his arc in this movie, Rocket deserved it. He really did. He's got the bravery, he's got the leadership aspect, he's got the loyalty, he's got the ability to overcome hardships and learn from them. He's leadership material. And so I'm glad that of all the people Peter could have given it to, he gave it to Rocket. That was lovely. I also loved him giving the Zune to Rocket. It's like, I was leader for now, you know, this was my music, so it's about time this gets passed on to you. That was awesome. Now, Peter and Gamora departing in this movie I thought was really satisfying. I thought it was nice how they decided that they're just going to go do their own separate thing and how Gamora's going to go with the Ravagers. But I like how they depart on good terms, even after all the arguing and all the convincing that he tried to do with her. At the end of the day, both of them work together to save everybody and to save Rocket, and they work together to accomplish a greater good. And so I like how at the end of the thing, Gamora's like, hey, I may not be your Gamora, but I'm pretty sure we had a lot of fun. I love how Peter's whole thing was like, I know that you're not my Gamora, but you know what? This Gamora isn't so bad. It's like, they may have had some rocky stuff go on in this movie, but I like the fact that they end on good terms because they acknowledge the good parts about each other. And that was really fitting ending for the characters. I really, really appreciate that. I'm glad that they can move beyond this. I also love seeing Drax and Nebula give a new home to the children on Nowhere, as I've already said. I like the whole thing about how like it's kind of like Drax's destiny to work with kids or to make kids happy. Like that's what he does. He's a very good like emotional person, as I've said, and I think it's nice that Drax is basically going to be like the teacher, or father, or leader for these kids who don't have a family. It's really, really fitting for him. I also feel like it's a fitting ending for Nebula because Nebula is so miserable in the first Guardians of the Galaxy, and you do feel bad for her too, but it's nice to see how softened up she became, but she's also a strong person. So it's nice to see how she can stand up for herself and she can do her own thing, but she's also learned what not to do with the people in her life. And so I think that Drax and Nebula are perfect for these kids. Mantis decided that she wants to go live her own life outside of what she knows. I thought was fitting after everything that happened with Ego, because I realized that she was with Ego pretty much her whole life and had to do everything under her, and then she got into this family, and now like Mantis is now realizing I gotta do my own thing. It's like the thing where it's like, because she never really found her purpose. So I don't know what they're going to end up doing with her, but I think that's sweet what they do that with her. And I thought Peter deciding to stop running and to go see his grandfather again was a great way to cap off Peter's arc for this film. And they got to go back to home and he got to see his granddad again because he hasn't seen him since he got abducted. Man, that was a really fitting ending to the arc. And that leads into the awesome post-credit scene where he's eating cereal and they're talking about Kevin Bacon getting kidnapped, which is funny. It's reference to the holiday special, but I like how at the end it says the legendary Star-Lord will return. So Star-Lord's still going to be around, you know, so we'll see what they do with him. But I like the fact that Star-Lord is starting to reconnect with his human side outside of the galaxy, so I think that's a really fitting next chapter for the character. And then Rocket starting a new team is awesome. I can't wait to see if they do more stuff with the Guardians of the Galaxy in the future. The new Guardians, of course. You know, if we see these characters again, and I really would like to, I'm excited to see what they do with them because I feel like they all got fitting arcs and conclusions in this film, and I feel like they could only go up from here if they decide to do like one more story with them. But even if we never get to see the Guardians of the Galaxy again, I will be satisfied because this really was the amazing end-all be-all conclusion for these characters. And something that I've written down in my notes that I think is important to mention is that there's excellent conclusions to all of these characters' arcs, and I wrote down that it's hard to imagine the last 9 years without Guardians of the Galaxy, and these weird characters from different backgrounds coming together to make a compelling family. That's what's always been really interesting about the Guardians of the Galaxy. I remember when it was announced this movie was going to come out, a lot of people were really skeptical of it because it was like the first MCU movie that like was not directly tied with the Avengers, and not many people really knew who the Guardians of the Galaxy were. They were not these iconic people at the time, and so people were like, is this movie going to be any good? And they also seemed skeptical of the fact that this movie had a talking raccoon and a walking tree and humans. So it's just the thing where people are like, is this movie going to be any good, or is it just like going to suck? And it came out and everyone loved it, and it's become so like iconic. It's such a staple of pop culture that it's actually hard to think about these last almost 9 years without Guardians of the Galaxy. And you could argue that they were always going to be big because yes, it is part of the MCU, but because they weren't directly tied to the Avengers, they also became iconic in their own right. It was almost like the Marvel version of Star Wars in a way. And so when I think of these last 9 years, it's hard to think about them without the Guardians of the Galaxy. But of all the joy that they brought to us with these characters, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 really was, in my opinion, like the best way they could have ended all this stuff. You know, you could argue that maybe some things maybe could have been better in terms of like the filmmaking or in terms of like, I don't know, I know there's some stuff that people probably won't be a huge fan of. I'm not going to go into specifics or anything, but you know, at the end of the day, it's that thing where it's like, I feel like you can overlook those flaws because everything else is so awesome. It's like, life is short, you know, you can't really just spend a whole time being like, oh, like there's this one little thing I didn't really care for. You know, so I'm just going to go and make a huge mountain out of a molehill out of that. Now, it's that thing where it's like, there's a few things maybe that you would have liked done better, but like, I'll let it slide, I'll accept it because everything else is so awesome. Guys, this movie was incredible. I'm really happy that this movie turned out as great as it did. I left the theater so satisfied with a big grin on my face. I hope you guys enjoyed this review for the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This is a really fun spoiler review. I'm glad that I could just geek out for a bit and talk about things I loved. I hope it didn't get too long. I'm really hoping it didn't. If you guys like me to do spoiler reviews for movies in the future, I'll maybe consider doing some of them. Hopefully this review didn't get too long. I hope you guys enjoyed it enough. Tomorrow I will have a review coming out for Miss Marvel. I can't wait to talk about that. I just have one episode left I have to watch. And I got some other stuff coming out next week. Actually, next week, speaking of Guardians of the Galaxy, I will be doing a small review for the I Am Groot shorts next week, which is kind of interesting, but I feel like it's fitting because it is part of the Disney Plus stuff that I'm doing my series on, and it is part of Guardians of the Galaxy, which is popular right now, so be on the lookout for all that stuff. If you guys want to see my spoiler-free review for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, it'll be somewhere on the screen. If you guys want to see my reviews for other stuff I'm reviewing, like other MCU stuff, or the Sony Spider-Man stuff I'm reviewing, or the TV shows, you can click on the playlist somewhere around the screen. If you want to support the channel, please hit the like button and feel free to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you get notified of my latest videos. Thank you guys so much as always for watching. Also, go click the link in the description to go follow me on Twitch, Instagram, and TikTok, because I've been posting a lot on there, post a lot of extra content on there. Yeah, so please go do that if you want to support me. Yeah, thank you guys so much as always for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and yeah, that's been it. Peace!